All right, this is the part one of our final lesson in Unit 1, talking about theories of change. And these lecture notes are based from two textbooks. And if this course was ever offered in your school, these textbooks might be available from your social science department head. You might be able to take them out. So the first one is, or the first part, we're going to look at external factors. So external factors are factors such as the environment, demography, or geography, and technology can influence our society and how society changes or shifts. Okay, and so there were four different external factors that can really influence change. So part A here is physical environment. Physical environment. So these would be ideas like climate, weather, vegetation, animal population, and other human factors. So an example within our generation, or I guess your generation, would be the idea of climate change. And we've already seen a shift. We used to call it global warming. Now we seem to call it climate change. And the debate is still out about whether or not this is just a little tidbit of time or whether this is a real trend. But this has really influenced our society. And you have like the Al Gore Inconvenient Truth documentary. And it really, I think it had a major factor in almost using a scare tactic in terms of that we must change. We must stop polluting, start recycling. We've got to pressure governments to stop industrial emissions. All of these things. It's almost like a green movement. And we'll talk about the environmental movement later on in the course. So that has really influenced social change. And I realize there are some problems with Al Gore and his documentary. That's something we can talk about later in the course. Other physical environments, like natural disasters, hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, can influence social policy and urban design. We have like Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, which I guess is getting upon 10 years ago, but New Orleans is still recovering and having to adjust their urban planning to deal with potential natural disasters again. And you always hear of trends like soil erosion, or if people live on the beach, how much of the beachfront is being sucked up by the ocean each year. And I don't know, I think a lot of people dream about living on water, but I wonder how much soil erosion or that thing or those kind of ideas factor into where people build homes now. Earthquakes in the Ottawa Valley here, we live on a bit of a fault line. California is on a major fault line. How does that impact social change? So in Ontario, we practice fire drills, we practice lockdowns. I am sure in California they would practice what happens in an earthquake. I'm sure in coastal regions like Japan or Southeast Asia, they would practice tsunami drills and such. In terms of vegetation, I guess, again, Renfrew County is a bit of a agricultural community, but we are seeing some farms who have used genetically modified crops or seeds, and now as they blow off into other farmers' fields, they're impacting these quote unquote organic fields. So is do organic products actually exist anymore, or are they all byproducts of genetically modified seedlings that are blowing away onto other farms? some people are really concerned about certain weeds, and I keep hearing about the purple, I think it's called purple loosestrife, and how that's a weed that's going to take over a lot of our vegetation. Well, what will society do to take care of that? In terms of animal populations, I don't know if we're overrun by deer population and there's a number of more collisions with deer, would the Ontario government increase the quota of how many deer are shot or hunted each fall? I'm hearing Ontario is increasing or reintroducing the spring bear hunt. And I don't know if bears have been endangering humans in certain parts of the area or not, but those would be examples of how the physical environment can impact social change. B is population changes. And this is very indicative of Canadian society because we are a cultural mosaic. We have a country that's, was here from our First Nations people, and then primarily by English and French settlers. But now with our immigration policy, we have so much diversity that this immigration can have a major impact on one major area. So it's population changes in the blank. So does this impact ideas of holidays, traditions, and political correctness? And I think I don't know if it was in our orientation or if it was in our pre-course questions, people were talking about political correctness, and inevitably we go back to the idea of wishing each other Merry Christmas, which some people think isn't politically correct, and that we should use the term Happy Holidays or Season's Greetings instead. Personally, I think that's a bit of a stretch. Again, as somewhat of a Christian person, I wouldn't be offended if someone wished me Happy Hanukkah or wished me or gave me a greeting in some other culture. That, to me, that's just a well wish, but this is just me thinking. And technically, the term holiday means holy day, and so is that offensive to an atheist or a pagan? And again, I'm playing a bit of a devil's advocate here, pardon the pun. But if you look at the idea of, let's look at the school calendar in Ontario. It's very much drawn up based on Christian holidays. We have the holidays, sorry, I shouldn't say holidays. Our vacation time is set around the Christian calendar, around Christmas and Easter and such. Students in Ontario don't necessarily have Hanukkah off or don't have Ramadan off. And Ramadan could take place during the Olympics. And is that problematic for Muslim athletes who can't intake water or food during daylight hours? Again, this is kind of looking at it as from an inclusionary school of thought perspective. And does it provide diversity in local celebrations? I love the diversity of celebrations, and I like, and this would be a surprise to no one, but I like the diversity of food. I like, going for sushi, going for Vietnamese, going for Italian. That's the part that I love of Canada. So as population changes, these things are going to influence social policy. Now, what is happening is a lot of our immigrant population is migrating to urban areas. So they're going to places like Toronto, like Montreal, like Vancouver. Again, those are where the opportunities are, and that's where other small communities are. Like you have, Little Italy and Chinatown and pockets of Ukrainian villages and such. So one of the ideas is to try to attract immigrant populations into our rural and northern communities. But that's going to come with a bit of a challenge. C is proximity, or the closeness. So what happens when two cultures who live side by side for an extended period of time, who live side by side for an extended period of time? So will you see a sharing of cultural artifacts or a diffusion of cultural ideas? Diffusion of cultural ideas. So from grade 9 or 10 science, diffusion is the idea that something moves from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration to balance it out. And I guess that talks in terms of cells. You can tell I'm not a science teacher. But let's say if someone sprays Axe body spray at one part of a locker, it's really highly concentrated at one locker, but then it'll eventually diffuse down that whole hallway of lockers. So same can be said for certain cultural ideas. And in Canada, because again, we are a cultural mosaic, and we have embraced aspects of many different cultures. We can go with food. In any given Canadian city, you can probably choose numerous different types of multicultural food. We've embraced what are those plaid kilts? Oh, kilts from Ireland and Scotland. We've embraced the idea of dreadlocks from Jamaica, hardcore heavy metal from Germany, technology from Korea, reggae from Jamaica, tacos from Mexico. This is the diffusion of culture. And we talked about this in the anthropology of cyborgs, how globalization and technology has really shrunk the idea of time and space. So now we have the ability to travel to different countries more efficiently. We have the ability to communicate with other countries. So our world has become smaller, and so we're having a diffusion of culture throughout the world. And this is something we'll talk about in Unit 5, but proximity, or how close two cultures live together. In Europe, there's so many distinct cultures, and I often wonder if eventually these cultures are just going to blend together, or are there mechanisms in place to make a distinct French culture, a distinct Dutch culture, a distinct German culture? And I think there are still strong signs of nationalism when you see ideas like the Olympics or like the World Cup. Nationalism still is alive and well. Part D, or the final one of external factors, is social environment. Social environment. So this is just like the general thinking of a given society. Are they primarily left wing or right wing? So do societies embrace the idea of the collective good or individual good? And do smaller and isolated societies have a better chance of maintaining cultural traditions? So if you look back to the lesson on social cohesion in Rossetto, were they able to maintain high social cohesion because they were so isolated? Are there cultures who are isolated on some island or some remote area that don't have outside influences like the mass media, like MTV, like ESPN, where they can maintain their language and their foods without this globalization, without this Americanization? Ethnocentrism is the belief that your own culture or that your own nation is superior to others. And a paradigm, and I know that seems random, but sometimes when we're in our culture, we think ethnocentrically that our culture is the best. And sometimes I'm guilty of that, thinking that Canada is the best country in the world, but maybe there's better ways to do things. So a paradigm, and there's not really a natural shift here, but a paradigm is a way of thinking. And a paradigm shift is when a way of thinking changes social policy. So I'll give you two examples of paradigms. And again, this is something we'll talk about in Unit 3 or 4. In terms of the environment, there's something called the dominant paradigm, which says that society must make material wealth for for the next generation at whatever cost. So it doesn't matter what impact it has on the environment. It's all about making material wealth, with probably the side thinking that if we have wealth, we'll be able to have money for research and science to fix any other environmental problems. So that's what the dominant paradigm is. The alternative environmental paradigm says we need to focus on relationships, and we need to focus on taking care of the environment, and material wealth should be secondary. It's very left wing. It's very quote unquote tree hugger ish, I guess. Um, but I think there's a lot of validity there. Um, so the other idea is the advent of new technologies can have wide-reaching influence on society and culture. Think about how much the iPad has changed our culture, or cell phones, or Twitter, or Facebook. Even back one of the printing press. So the idea of writing things down. Plato said the art of writing things down was the first step towards forgetfulness. And during the Reformation, and when Martin Luther was able to translate the Bible and mass produce it, it had major repercussions. It divided the Christian church into Catholicism and Protestantism. And sometimes we don't think of what the intended or the byproduct or the consequences of these technologies are. And I think it's Ask FM, that app, where you can ask and answer anonymous questions. I just shake my head. It just opens up a can of worms that I don't know if our society is ready for. And so sociologist William Fielding Ogburn says that technology is the single most important mechanism driving progress in society. So we'll talk about the role that technology has in social change in one of the following units. So that concludes part 1, external factors.